Australia. That theme is synonymous with only one man, John Laws, the king of Sydney radio. Good evening to you, John.
Philip, how nice to hear your voice. And that really is a pretty piece of music. I never really listened to it, but I listened to it. Then it's nice, isn't it?
Well, it's aptly titled El Presidente, because indeed you are really El Presidente of Australian radio, aren't you?
Oh, I don't know about that. That's nice of you. Thank you.
A lot of people think the tune is The Lonely Bull, but in fact it's not.
Well, a lot of people probably thought at one time in my life that would have been far more appropriate. It probably would have been, too.
John, King of Sydney radio, yes, but it seems that you've never wanted to conquer Melbourne radio. Why is this?
Well, I really have. It's just difficult to do if you're in Sydney. But if there were a way of doing both. But we have that sort of attitude, that Sydney-Melbourne attitude, which really shouldn't exist because it's a great big country that we live in, wonderful country, best in the world, and we should all be together. But there's sort of divisiveness that's always been there, and I suppose that's hard to remove, and I can understand to a degree that being the case.
Yes, and yet I suppose talkback radio is to an extent parochial by nature, isn't it?
Well, I suppose it is if you allow it to be. I don't think that it need be, because, you see, we do this program, I think, on 40 stations or something.
Yeah.
And we talk to Alice Springs, we talk to Port Hedland, we talk to Adelaide, and we talk to Tully in Queensland and Dalby and all over the place. And it seems to work out all right, because we talk on national and international issues rather than local issues. Instead of talking about the local council, we talk about bigger things, and that seems to work fine. So I don't think it need be parochial.
John, if there was no talkback radio in Australia today, would you still be a disc jockey playing records?
Oh, yeah, because I'm still a disc jockey playing records. I played a lot this morning, and some days I play more than others, but I play records every day because I love music. Yes, that's really important to me.
You have a habit of shaping news stories rather than breaking them. Could John Laws topple a government?
Oh, I don't know. You'd have to ask a government.
Well, have you? Have you had that influence, or have you exerted it in the past?
I really couldn't say that. I couldn't say that. Others have said it, but I certainly couldn't say it.
I've got in front of me Laws, A Life of Power by John Lyons, and it surprises me that a life in politics has never been of interest to you, personally.
Well, no, it wouldn't surprise you if you stopped and thought for a moment. Can you imagine having the fun and reaping the rewards in politics that you can reap in radio?
I follow your drift. But I'm thinking of the Joe for PM campaign. I thought there could be perhaps a John for PM campaign in the future.
No, thank you. No, thank you, because I wouldn't be very good at that. I'm okay at thinking of the ideas, but some of my ideas are very simplistic, because really my philosophy is based on irreverent logic, and irreverent logic is something that doesn't go hand in hand with good politics. Well, so it makes other people think, but it doesn't necessarily work.
Yes, and I don't think you could earn as much as a Prime Minister as you can as John Laws, the radio personality, perhaps, from what we've been reading of late.
Well, you have to be careful what you read, Philip.
We dabble in nostalgia on a Sunday night, Bruce and myself, so we want to go way back to New Guinea, John, to the very, very beginning.
All right.
What are your memories of New Guinea, or did you leave there at a very young age?
I left there at a very young age. I left there when I was just turned 6. So that's pretty young. But I remember it very well, and I remember leaving very well. I remember my first day in school in New Guinea because I wet my pants, because we all had to stand up and say the Lord's Prayer. And I didn't know the words, so I wet my pants.
Right.
So I have very warm memories.
You have warm memories, isn't it? So the reason that your parents and yourself left New Guinea, was it the fear of Japanese invasion during World War II? What's the story?
Not the fear of it.
The reality of it.
Yeah, the reality of it. So when the Japanese arrived, we made a decision, along with the rest of the white population there, women and children, men stayed behind, to leave. Yeah. So we were put on a troop ship.
What year are we talking about?
1941.
Mm-hmm.
And we were put on a troop ship, and it was called the Katoomba. That was about December, I think, 41. So almost the beginning of 1942, and we came to Sydney.
So what are your memories of your first 6 years in New Guinea?
Well, just having a good time and a certain freedom, and a very good friend in the form of a black man called Airman, who used to look after me because we had hot and cold running help around the place, as people did when they lived in places like New Guinea in those days.
Yes.
And he was a wonderful man and a wonderful friend. I always saw him as a man. He was probably a boy, but he was known as my boy, Airman. And Airman used to look after me and talk to me and walk with me. So I have very fond memories of a certain freedom and a great friendship very early in life, which has probably been very important to me.
Do you get back there very often for memory's sake?
I've never been back.
That's interesting that you haven't.
Never been back. Nothing's ever as good when you go back, you know.
I noticed in the book that I mentioned earlier, Laws, A Life of Power, that it's dedicated to Mum and Dad, great Australians. Tell me about your parents.
Well, I didn't write the book, and I didn't do the dedication. He dedicated that to his mum and dad.
Oh, okay.
That's John Laws. I haven't read the book.
You're kidding?
No.
Oh, it's not an authorised biography then?
Well, I mean, I cooperated with him because he was going to do it anyway. But even if it was authorised, I wouldn't have read it. There was one done before. I can't remember that, called Life by Misadventure.
That's right.
That was done by Tim Hoare. I've not read that either. I don't read things about myself. I don't read newspaper press clippings about myself. I certainly don't read biographical things about myself.
Why is this? Why do you choose not to?
Because I know what I did. I don't need to be reminded. Those sort of things are for people who don't know what I did and think they might learn by reading it in a newspaper or in a book. They generally don't, but they think they might. I don't want to read that stuff.
Before we talk about your radio career, tell us about your childhood days. Tell us about your parents and what influenced you to go into radio in the first place.
Well, hunger was what influenced me to go into radio. I never really thought much about it before. My parents were very ordinary middle-class people, if you want to subscribe to the theory that we don't live in a classless society, because we don't. My dad was English, and he went to New Guinea and had trade stores in New Guinea. My mother was from Sydney. They went to New Guinea very early, in the very early 1930s. I was born there. Then I really lost touch with my dad because he stayed away for most of the war, then came back about 1945, and he died in 1951, so I had about 6 years of really knowing him. And then my mother died 4 years ago. But it was a very normal sort of upbringing. I went to school and did very badly. I enjoyed being away from school more than I enjoyed being at it.
What took your parents to New Guinea in the first place?
I have no idea. I suppose a sense of adventure on the part of my father. He and his best friend, who became my godfather, went there together. Before that, they'd been in Africa, and they'd been in India, and they'd been mining in Africa, and they were just adventurers. My father and his best friend, a man called George Loudon, and then they wound up in New Guinea, George Loudon having plantations, rubber plantations, copra plantations, and my dad being involved in trade stores and plantations.
Are you an only child?
No, I have a sister, Jennifer. She's 18 months older than I am.
I recall at an early age, John Laws, that in fact you had polio, and I wondered just how that has influenced your life. Did that make you a battler? Is that how you learned to become a survivor?
I think probably I had it twice, strangely enough. First time I had it was when I was about 12, when I got it at the time of the Royal Easter Show. There was a polio epidemic at that time in the late 1940s and early 50s. And I spent time in hospital. I must have been young. I must have been about 10 when I had it.
Yes.
And you were put in an isolation ward. I mean, it really was an isolation ward, and you couldn't see people, and they took everything away from you and put you in strange garb, almost like prison garb, and you couldn't see your mum and dad, and you were treated like some kind of leper. And that certainly gave me a lot of time to think, and I suppose it made me very determined to survive, and very determined to not find myself in that sort of position again, that sort of position being where I couldn't be in control of what I did. Of course, I did find myself in that position again by getting polio again in 1962.
But the first time around, is this when you became perhaps an avid radio listener with all that time on your hands?
Yeah, I can't even remember listening to the radio. No, I don't think we even were able to have things like radios. You wouldn't believe what it was like. Cement floors, cement walls, and iron beds, and really that was about it. And they came in with stuff like phenol, and it was infectious. I mean, people were terrified of it. It was equivalent to the AIDS virus, I suppose. Then people were that terrified of it. And I don't think you could have things like radios. So I don't recall radio then, but I certainly recall listening to radio when I grew up. But we all did, you know, First Light Fraser and Dossier on Demetrius and Hagen's Circus and all that stuff. I listened to all that, but didn't we all?
So who were your heroes on radio in those days?
Well, really, Demetrius and Biggles and all those first line.
Of course, and for me too, but among local radio personalities in your area, for example, disc jockeys.
Not that I could, because they really didn't exist. The first one that I ever remember was Alan Toohey, and he was on 2UW, and he used to have a program called Ashley's Popular Choice, I think it was, and he used to play the 7 biggest selling records of the week.
Yeah.
And of course that was the forerunner of what later became the top 40. But then I went away to the country, jackarooing. I went to Wellington in New South Wales, because I loved the land and I wanted to be on the land, so I jackarooed there, and I really I didn't pay much attention to radio at all, because I had no intention of having anything to do with it. But then after 18 months of jackarooing, I decided that I should have a look at Australia, so I hitchhiked around Australia, found myself in Bendigo in Victoria without any money and very cold, and got a job at the local radio station as a temporary job.
How long did you stay there?
Well, I stayed there 18 months, and of course I've been in radio ever since.
One of our personalities here at 3AW, Peter Meehan, swears this story is true. Now, embellish it if you choose to, or correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a period when John Laws was at 2KO Newcastle, and I think the boss might have been a bloke called George Hood with a gammy arm. And the story I hear is that you were supposed to do a 10-second commercial for the Waterside Workers Federation, which you absolutely refused to do. You just wouldn't be a part of it. Does this story ring a bell?
No, it doesn't, but it's probably one of many elaborations on things that have happened in my career. I would love to be able to say, yes, it's true, and I was so anti-union I refused to do it. But, Philip, I'm sorry.
Well, John, the tag was that, as I hear it, you were threatened with a sack if you wouldn't do the Waterside Workers' numbers every morning, call them to duty. And you adamantly refused to do this until the day George Hood came and stood over the microphone and said, if you don't do it, you get the sack. And so the story I hear is that the record finished and you actually did the 10-second commercial for the Waterside Workers, but with the microphone turned off, and you did it solely for George's benefit. Does that sound like John Laws the Rebel?
Well, it sounds like the sort of thing I would do, but sadly I don't believe I did it. If I did do it, I don't have any recollection of it.
Tell us about some of the mischief you did get up to in those days.
Well, it wasn't really sort of much mischief. We just had a good time doing radio programs and learning and discovering things. When I started, we used to have wire recorders before we had tape recorders. And I used to be fascinated by how you could make reverberation and how you could join things together. And certainly there would be times when I would be in the company of young ladies in the radio studio in Bendigo, and because of my dedication to the young lady at the time, I'd forget that Hagen Circus or whatever it was had finished.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Martin's Corner was another one that we used to play. They all ran about 12 minutes, which just gave you time if you're an active young man. And so sometimes you'd sort of get a little carried away and the serial had finished, but nothing ever really serious, nothing ever really bad.
Right. Where did you move to from Bendigo? What was your next career move?
I was sent by the management. The stations were owned by AWA at that time, and I was sent by AWA to 40O in Townsville, primarily because it was the furthest place they could find away from Bendigo.
Were you a very ambitious young man at that age?
No, I've never been ambitious. I was ambitious with my social life. I certainly enjoyed that. I was fascinated by the company of young ladies, and I certainly pursued that with a great deal of ambition. But as far as work was concerned, no, I never ever said I must do this, and I will be the best at this, and I must be earning such and such by such and such a time. I just sort of happened along, and it all seemed to work pretty well.
Have you ever let any of these young ladies be your downfall, or have you been single-minded career-wise?
Oh, well... a couple got me into trouble here and there, but only because I got them into trouble. But that is all part, and I mean I got them into trouble in the nicest way, that I had passionate affairs with them, and I suppose sometimes I concentrated more on the young ladies than I did on work, which was probably detrimental to my career. I would admit that.
So when's the first time you faced a microphone with a Sydney audience, a huge market out there? When's the first time that John Laws became a household name in Sydney?
That was 1957. but it took a little while to become a household name. 1957, I started reading news for 2UE. And we used to read it from a separate building. We used to read it from the Herald, Sun Herald building down in Ultimo. And Gary O'Callaghan and I used to read the news together. That was 1957. And then beginning of 1957, and then came the Royal Easter Show, and we broadcast from the Royal Easter Show, and from that moment on, I never looked back. We started to play top 40 music, and we used to get these immense crowds around us broadcasting from this funny studio at the Royal Easter Show, and that was sort of the beginning of it. And from there on, it just got better and better and more fun, and that's what it's continued to do right up until this very moment.
Well, I suppose if we're talking about 1957, radio was head-on then with television. You were in direct competition with television, which was the new rage. And that's why you do these outside broadcasts from the Royal Easter Show and so on, to try and woo listeners.
That's right, and that's why we had to develop the top 40, because things like Hagen's Circus and Dossier and Demetrius, you could watch something similar on television with pictures. So if you could watch it on television, you sure as hell weren't going to listen to it on radio. So that was when we had to discover the top 40, and that's when we started to attract the younger audience by playing all the hit songs that they like Rock Around the Clock and Singing the Blues and all that stuff.
Have you ever considered going behind the scenes and being a television or a radio executive rather than being front of microphone or front of camera? Surely with your experience, you know, you could handle that situation superbly.
Well, my experience has only applied to me, and I doubt very much that I would be very good at telling other people what to do. And apart from that, I never really, I couldn't see myself having to be there at certain hours and sit behind a desk. I wouldn't like that.
Are you good at taking advice? Are you good at listening to other people who tell John Laws what to do?
If I respect the person, yeah. If I don't have much respect for the person, I don't take too much notice of what they say.
Through the years, there have been a lot of John Laws imitators. Do these offend you, or do they flatter you?
Well, some of them are offensive when they believe that they have a right to be instant John Laws. When I remember the wearisome hours that I spent getting to where I got, that I found bothersome. But really, they only do themselves a disservice, as the history books show.
A lot of fellow performers have come and gone by the wayside since 1957. What's the secret of your survival?
Well, I love doing it. I've reached the stage now where I have no difficulty. Public opinion doesn't bother me very much anymore, and it's all worked better since I ceased to allow public opinion to bother me. So I have no difficulty telling the truth about anything to anybody at any time. I enjoy what I'm doing, and the people believe me. So I suppose that's why it works.
You always appear to me to have a very tough exterior, but what hurts John Laws?
Well, I don't like particularly to be criticised by people that I like or love, but I don't think anybody does. We're supposed to be able to, when you're in the public eye, you're supposed to be able to accept that criticism. I find it difficult if I like the people. If I love the people, if my family feels I've done something wrong, then of course that's very hurtful. And nobody likes to be criticised. I mean, I'm just the same as you or anybody else. I don't particularly like criticism, particularly if it's correct.
Would you foresee a day where you might retire?
I'll retire when the people want me to. When they indicate to me that they've had enough of what I do, then that would be my duty to retire. But what would I do? I mean,
well, you've got the farm and you've got your collection of cars, for example.
Oh, I've got plenty.
You've got plenty of hobbies, haven't you?
Sure, I have. But life is work, and work is life. If I couldn't work, I couldn't see much reason to do anything at all. I mean,
I feel the same way.
Yeah, you go. Well, you get out of bed in the morning, got to do something, you might as well work.
When this business is in your blood, I think you're stuck with it for life.
Yeah, well, I love it. I just have a happy time. But what a wonderful job I have. I come here and I express opinions about things that I find interesting. I talk to people that I find interesting, and I play records that I'd play if I was sitting around the house anyway. What
would you like to be remembered for at the turn of the century, into the 21st century? If there's one thing that you'd like to be remembered for, what would it be?
Well, I'd be very flattered just to be remembered. That'd do.
It seems to me that television doesn't play a very large part of your life, inasmuch as it doesn't seem to be as important to you as radio. I mean, you're hugely successful on the midday show or whatever you turn your hand to, but I get the feeling that John Laws can, give or take television as he chooses.
Yeah, well...
Take it or leave it, in other words.
Well, with television, I find that you're far too reliant on other people. See, when I do my radio program, I have total control of what I do. I push all the buttons, I play all the music, I read all the ads, take the phone calls, I do everything. So I have total control. But when you're doing television, you're so reliant on other people to put a light in the right place, or to point a camera in the right direction, or to make sure you get the cue here. And it's and you've got to wear makeup. So I come in here without a shave and have a good time.
You seem to lead such an active life and such a glamorous life, but does John Laws ever get bored or lonely or depressed?
Oh, yeah. I don't get bored because I'm not of that makeup. I don't sit still long enough to get bored, but of course I get depressed, and of course I get lonely. But that happens to all of us. All people, I think, have moments of feeling lonely, even if you're surrounded by a lot of people. If you've just got a bit on your mind and something that you really feel you can't talk to anybody else about, even the person that you love, because you might want to protect them from it or whatever it might be, then you can feel very lonely. And of course you get depressed, yeah.
Describe your weekend to us. When you turn off that microphone on Friday at lunchtime, what happens to you for the weekend? Where do you head and how do you spend those precious hours?
Well, normally I head straight to the country, which is about a 100-kilometre drive. So I, as quickly as I can get into the car, then I do a lot of telephoning from the car on the way to the farm to sort of finish off Friday, but that doesn't matter because I'm on my way to the farm. Then when I get there, I immediately change and start to fool around in my shed at the farm, or I walk around the garden, or I do some pruning, or a million things to do. If it's winter time, I make sure that I've got firewood, and I might set a couple of fires, and I might light a couple of fires. And then at about 5, the men who work on the farm come over, and we all have our Friday night beer together, which takes us through until about 8, I guess. So we have a number of beers. Then Caroline and I cook dinner together, maybe watch a movie, sit in front of the fire, talk, and then Saturday just work around the farm or go for a ride on my Harley Davidson, or read if it's wet, sit in front of the fire, tidy up my shed. I seem to spend more time tidying up the shed than doing anything else. It's never tidy.
And what's on the farm? Have you got cattle there or sheep or?
No, we've got cattle and deer. We've got about 300 head of deer and about 400 head of cattle.
Yeah.
So that keeps us busy. And of course we also have a very large garden. It's there's 3 houses that have big gardens around them that we look after. The garden at our main house about 5 acres, so that's a fair bit of gardening.
What's this heading up towards the Blue Mountains, is it, John?
No, it's heading north. They're heading north up towards the Central Coast and then inland.
Oh, I see. I suppose if you chose to, you could have a landline from your farm. You'd never have to go into Sydney at all.
And then wouldn't I ruin the farm? Farm would never be the same again, would it?
I don't know.
Well, you see,
the landline might spoil the view, but you'd never have to hop in that car and drive down to Sydney, would you?
But then I'd spoil the farm, because the farm would become a place of radio work instead of a place of different work.
Exactly, yes. It's nice to be able to switch off, isn't it?
And apart from that, I'm very lucky because I have a lovely house in Sydney that I enjoy being in, and I enjoy the city and like very much dining out and visiting friends and going to parties, so I'm very happy the way it is.
John, we've really enjoyed talking with you tonight. You've been very generous with your time, and we've chewed the fat on many occasions over the years, and it's always a joy for me, and I know it is for our listeners too.
Well, Philip, it's very nice of you, and I'm available whenever you want to talk.
Well, sometime in the future, and perhaps over Christmas, New Year, by arrangement with you, Bruce is very frustrated he can't be in on this chat tonight, but we might even be lucky enough to catch you at that farm of yours sometime, one Sunday night in the New Year, and perhaps, you can describe the scene for us on that occasion. But I won't let you go without asking you about John Laws the entertainer as far as records go. I haven't seen a John Laws CD yet that I'm aware of.
No, you won't.
And why not?
Oh, well, I just don't think it's I don't think it's appropriate anymore. I mean, I love doing it. I love music, and I still sing and I still write. But I just don't think that I should do it anymore. I mean, I push enough of myself on people without pushing more on them. So
you've done some very good collaborations, including one I thoroughly enjoyed with Henry Mancini, of all people.
Oh yes, well, I wrote all the poetry for that, and Henry was very impressed with the poetry, and then he wrote the music. It's called Just You and Me Together, Love. Is that the one?
Yes, that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Well, I did that. I did that with Henry Mancini. He's a wonderful man, and we did very well with that. That record did very well in the United States.
I never go to Hollywood without people like Henry Mancini and Bob Hope and George Burns asking after you very fondly. Obviously, you still have a lot of friends in the showbiz fraternity.
Oh, yes, I do. And I'm very fond of them, and we keep in touch. And when I go to the United States, I endeavour to see them. Some have come and gone. Others have been more fortunate than others. You lose track of some. Paul Williams, I don't know what's happened to Paul Williams. I've lost track of him, and there was a huge talent, a little man, but a whole lot of talent. But I see them all, and I enjoy. I have a wonderful life. I have absolutely no complaints at all.
Despite your own star status, do you still have stardust in your eyes? I mean, if you spend an evening with Frank Sinatra, would you still think to yourself, wow, this is great? Or have you become a bit blasé over the years?
Well, no, I would think it'd be fantastic. I mean, he's probably the greatest singer of all time, certainly the greatest living singer of all times. I still believe that Dick Haymes was the best crooner of all times.
Yes, he had a tragic life, didn't he?
Yeah, but what a wonderful voice. Wonderful voice.
Was he blacklisted by McCarthyism? Was he a part of that situation?
No, I think his main problem was B-double-O-Z-E, which he drank in copious quantities. But he was a wonderful singer. But if I was sitting with Frank Sinatra, I probably wouldn't know what to say. I certainly would be very impressed by the presence.
Is there anybody that you haven't interviewed that you still aspire to chat to across a microphone?
Yeah. Jesus.
Yes, well, that's not too easy, is it, from this distance?
Well, I don't know. Some people say that he's going to come back again, and if by any chance he does, I'd love to have an interview with him.
That'd be a scoop for you, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't know. It would certainly be enlightening. It would certainly be a revelation for me. I mean, to read what the man had to say about life and his attitude to it, and also Buddha would be not a bad sort of second choice either. They both had a lot of very good things to say about our lives and the good way to lead our lives. So, were it possible, there's two I'd like to interview.
Well, I think we'll leave it on that note, John, and thrilled talking to you, and take care, and we look forward to the next time.
Okay, Philip, well, let's make sure that we do have a talk again very soon, and if I don't talk to you before Christmas, I hope it's everything you want it to be.
To you, Caroline, and your family too, John. From Bruce and myself, all the best.
Thanks, Philip.
New York and June. How about you? I like a Gershwin too. How about you? I love a fireside when a storm is due. I like potato chips, moonlight, motor trips. How about you? I'm mad about good books, can't get my fill.